Let's get started with our first speaker, who is Gwen Riley-Jones. Some of you might have already met her at last week's session. Gwen is the imaging manager at the John Rylands Library at the University of Manchester. So Gwen, if you want to start presenting, then I'll give you the screen.
Thank you very much. Hello everybody. I'll just get the presentation up. Bear me 1 minute. Okie dokie. Kira, could you just confirm that you can see the presentation up?
Yeah, looks perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So hello everybody. My name is Gwen Riley-Jones and I'm the imaging manager at the John Rylands Library. I've worked at the library since 2008, starting on a part-time temporary contract, and we're still a relatively modest unit. There's myself, two senior photographers, Jamie Robinson and Tony Richards, and we also work with two project photographers, Jo Castle and Lisa Bisbeck. Jo will be presenting her Simon Papers projects in a couple of weeks, so please do come along to see that. During this presentation, I'll show a range of case studies to show examples of how we've applied each technique that is listed on screen. And I'd hoped that this presentation could have been more of a workshop where we could exchange practice and ideas, but given the current circumstances, I'll deliver a presentation, but welcome your input for discussion afterwards, either during this session or please do get in touch. Some of you will be familiar with the techniques described here and have your own practice to share, but others, some of this may be new. I'll give a very brief description of each technique, but again, if you've got any questions or comments or things to share, please also get in touch. Some of these case studies that I'll discuss shortly make me think of the famous Garry Winogrand quote, "I photograph to see what the world looks like in photographs." In terms of the work we do, we found that the photographs can show us things we cannot see with the naked eye. It may seem obvious to us as photographers, but we're increasingly seeing researchers and academics using photography as a tool to discover new information. The University of Manchester Library holds some of the finest collections of rare books, manuscripts, archives and visual collections in the world. Our printed collections encompass almost all landmarks of printing through 5 centuries, luxury books, magnificently illustrated, through to ephemera, broadsides and street literature. Our manuscript collection comprises of unique handwritten documents, including volumes, scrolls and single sheet material, written in more than 50 languages. The manuscripts appear on virtually every medium ever employed, from cuneiform clay tablets, papyri and palm leaf text, bamboo, bark and bone. The library holds significant collections of artworks, objects and photography, with particular strength in portraiture, painting, miniatures, drawing, sculptures, photographs and ceramics. And the scope of these very special collections and the modest team at the Rylands has enabled a special approach to photographing collections, where we've been able to develop close links with our conservators, curators and researchers. The John Rylands Library has always recognised the need to photograph its collections. This is an extract from a minutes book on the establishment of a photographic studio back in 1912. The little excerpt I want to read out is: "The value of the treasures of the library is greatly enhanced for purposes of research, since they are made more readily available to scholars at a distance, and there can be little doubt that this new department is fraught with possibilities of worldwide benefit." This was over 100 years ago. That statement has not changed, but the methods and techniques used by the imaging team have. At present, we use medium format digital camera systems by phase 1. The 150 megapixel digital back provides the greatest photographic detail and information possible. Our imaging unit in its current form started out in 2008 using a phase 1 P45+. And with each upgrade and improvement in image quality, we realised that we're working with powerful tools with the ability to make things visible that have not been possible before. With a 120mm macro lens and an IQ4 150, you aren't quite at the level of looking through a microscope, but it's possible to view objects in detail that would never have been possible with the naked eye. This magnification in and of itself isn't news to you, but what has become new is the way that we've worked with the researchers to use the images as a way of seeing, as a research tool. In the example on the screen here, we see the Messel fan from the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. We worked with Dr. Stefan Hans in the photography studio to develop our working methodology. We created a set of images to support the investigations into his research questions. We not only did the very high resolution imaging, but also a range of other techniques, including RTI and multispectral imaging. More on that later. In another example, let's take a look at how we can combine the power of these cameras with simple lighting techniques. This project from 2014 examines historic data and is an example of the importance of accurate data for online digital research. On the left is a very bad quality, sorry about that, scan transparency that was available online for many years. Compare this with a more recent digital born image. The difference is remarkable. It's difficult to think they're the same item. The Midas Touch Experiments in Imaging Gold was a research project into the best way to image gold illumination. During the project, we invited Cheryl Porter, a leading pigment specialist, to work with us. We used original methods of pigment application and studied different types of gold and how they react to light, gold over bowl, shell gold, and gold leaf, for example. Understanding how they were applied informed how we could better image our collection items. Here is a standard flat copy studio lighting. It's not bad, the colours are accurate, with a small amount of gold highlight detail, but there's room for improvement even here. With our adapted workflow, the difference in results is significant, maintaining the correct colour accuracy without blowing out the highlights whilst enhancing the gold areas. This new method picks up the gold wonderfully. Also notice how the gold flecking in the cover is also captured. We discovered that these lighting techniques could be used for further applications. On the bounce to light image, we see the damaged pigment in the face much more clearly than we had seen using standard or gold lighting. These three lighting techniques each display different characteristics of the surface material, the manuscript. With the standard lighting, the pigment damage was hardly visible. The sample area here that you see on screen is about the size of your fingernail. The combination of the high resolution camera and adapted lighting technique shows up the damage incredibly well, to the point of being able to see the depth of the layers of pigment, proving very useful for our collection care team working with the consolidation of pigments. This technique could then be used for other materials that can prove problematic for imaging. This is Trier Binding 17, a highly decorated and ornate ivory carved inlay with semi-precious stones. The usual standard lighting looks very flat, the gold dull, and you can't really see the stones. By using our adapted technique, we now get a much more realistic impression of the gold, and the stones are much more visible. The inlay becomes clear and you can appreciate the depth of the carving. In addition to these experiments with our standard kit, we've been developing our multispectral imaging workflow since 2012. I last presented to this conference about some of our early experiments in 2013, when we had removed the Bayer filter from our P45 Plus, purchased some MSI lighting panels, and were beginning to get some good results. The application of multispectral imaging was nothing new. There have been many conference papers on the subject. But what was new with us was the application of MSI by photographers in a photography studio. Usually this kind of imaging is reserved for imaging scientists or conservation departments. What we've been able to do is bring our practical knowledge of the application of photography and our analysis of visual images to inform and improve these working methods. In 2015, we upgraded our digital back to the IQ260 achromatic and upgraded our light panels. We now take 22 different images instead of 17 and have expanded our portfolio of what we can investigate using this technique. In its most basic form, multispectral imaging allows us to see things that we wouldn't normally see. We do this with a range of narrow band LED wavelength specific lights with an orthochromatic digital camera, capturing images from UV at 365 nanometers through to near infrared at 940 nanometers. We can then process the data in a number of ways depending on the research question. The most common examples of MSI use are imaging palimpsests. This is where writing material such as parchment has been cleaned of its original text and reused. There is an early collaborative effort between the imaging teams and students from the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Manchester. This is Greek P465. The first image on the left is under standard lighting. The second image is UV at 370 nanometers, making the under and the over text more visible. The third image is in infrared at 940 nanometers. The undertext has become transparent and the overtext is much more visible. The fourth image is a processed image, and the students use math and coding in a program called MATLAB to combine the middle two shots to show the difference in pixel values, thus making the undertext much more visible. This was one of our very first experiments. Once one is aware that different materials react to light in different ways, you can begin to apply that to specific materials. Here is a crop of a preparatory ink drawing for an engraving by Marcantonio Raimondi. The researcher was interested in seeing the pencil, so carbon, underdrawing below the iron gall ink. On the left is the ink drawing, as you would see it with standard lighting. On the right is an image taken in the near infrared wavelength. Carbon and iron gall both reflect differently in infrared, and here you can see the ink has disappeared, for want of a better word, leaving the carbon underdrawing clearly visible. A more recent example of MSI success can be seen in a Leverhulme-funded project led by Professor Joan Taylor. Their research has helped reveal that 4 Dead Sea Scroll fragments housed at the John Rylands Library, which were previously thought to be blank, do in fact contain text. The discovery means that the University of Manchester is the only institution in the UK to possess authenticated textual fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These images were captured as part of an MSI survey of a collection of leather fragments deposited by researcher Ronald Reed. It is the biggest project we have undertaken to date. MSI is not just for revealing the invisible. We can use it to monitor degradation, track preservation of collections, and help identify pigments and analyse inks. This is a non-invasive method which can be a precursor to other investigative techniques such as XRF, FORS, and Raman spectroscopy. With our MSI equipment, we can sample and analyse a reflectance material and plot the results on a reflectance curve chart seen here on the right. Here we have a number of well-known blue pigments that have been laid down by our collection care team. It has been imaged using MSI, and each sample is plotted in the chart and gives us a library of known pigment samples. These were then used in a comparison against MSI samples from an illuminated manuscript. The researcher was interested in seeing if the blue pigment that is used extensively throughout the manuscript was in fact lapis lazuli. Here, one sample of blue pigment from the manuscript is plotted against the nearest of our known blue samples, so the pink line on the chart that you see on the right. It can be clearly seen that the spectral curve is almost identical to that of lapis lazuli. You can just see some difference in the red wavelength region of the chart. A number of sample areas were plotted and compared, and we can confidently conclude that the pigment used is lapis lazuli. Further investigation with XRF or FORS, depending on the pigment you're investigating, may then reveal a more definitive answer if needed. The data collected for that particular project was then reused by another researcher. Carol Twining, senior scientist in the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health, and her PhD student were looking for data to use in their investigations, which would normally involve brain matter data, and they were excited to be able to use the MSI data from the John Rylands Library. Tony, one of the photographers, had just been saying a couple of days before that wouldn't it be great if someone could click an area of the manuscript page and see all of that pigment across the manuscript page. Within days, here's what they came back with, along with a request for a lot more data, which we were glad to provide. An excellent example of data reuse, and we look forward to seeing what they come up with. We've also had the privilege of collaborating with one of the leading research projects on pigment analysis in the UK, Team Pigment, led by Andy Beebe, Kate Nicholson and Richard Gameson. This cross-disciplinary group used Raman and reflectance spectroscopy in conjunction with codological and paleographical information to draw new conclusions on cultural and societal change. The team has specially designed rigs to support their equipment safely when working with books, and all equipment goes through rigorous testing before it can be applied to cultural collections. This experience confirms to us that as photographers, we have limits. We will continue to develop photographic practices as far as we can, but imaging science is a whole other sphere of expertise. And we will continue to make strategic partnerships with experts in this field. Another photographic technique we have successfully implemented is reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI, also known as polynomial textual mapping. An item directly below the camera is photographed several times as the light source moves around it at varying heights. There are some outstanding examples of this technique being applied in the cultural heritage sector, particularly by Bruno van der Meulen and Herrick Heimjau at KU Leuven. There are also commercially available domes with built-in LED lights, but this technique can also be achieved rather simply just using a handheld flash. We are grateful to Cultural Heritage Imaging, Bruno's team in Leuven, and Keats Webb from the Smithsonian for sharing their expertise with us. We use a Canon handheld flash and a length of string as a guide. We usually make 3 circuits at 3 different heights, resulting in 72 images. The images can then be imported into the RTI Builder and Viewer software, both of which are free to download, and I'll provide links at the end of the presentation. You'll notice the two black spheres alongside the colour chart. The software uses these to analyse and track the light reflection when it creates its final RTI file for viewing. The RTI viewer software lets us investigate the surface of the item, in this case papyrus, in the form of the St. John's fragment. In the viewer, you can manipulate the light source to simulate a light moving around the item. This lets you study the surface texture in great detail, in full colour or in one of the other rendering modes, such as specular enhancement. This is a straightforward, if underutilised, imaging tool. This year, during lockdown, Tony Richards spent some focused time developing a workflow for photogrammetry, also known as structure from motion. Whilst already common in museums and archaeological departments, before this year, we had only carried out some preliminary tests. Here, a series of images are taken of the item from a number of different angles. The photogrammetry software then measures and combines the images into a 3D object. This is an example of a bone effigy of John Wesley, made from horse vertebra. We are able to interact with it from any angle. It can be annotated, animated, and overlaid with additional visual information. It can also be used in virtual and augmented reality and 3D printed. There are challenges and still many areas for development, including cleaning meshes and acknowledgement of need for additional software such as Blender. And there's the familiar issue of standards and managing expectations. However, these 3D objects have begun to be incorporated in our online teaching, and some very recent examples of bound volumes are currently being ingested into our Manchester digital collections. I'd like to include this example of a simulated 3D object. I say simulated as it is created from just one digital image. The daguerreotype is notoriously difficult to photograph. It has a mirror-like surface that is especially difficult to display in digital format. Using the tools available on Sketchfab, Tony was able to simulate the material surface of the daguerreotype, something that has been impossible to do in the past. I think this is a good example of reusing old data with a new technique that enhances and furthers the study and research of our collection items online. All of these techniques come with a whole host of familiar challenges, many of which are in line with the challenges of standard digitisation practice. Development is constant and requires the collaboration of many colleagues across departments and institutions. But development is fun too, and we definitely get something out of problem solving all of these challenges. We'd love to share it with you, so please do get in touch if there's anything you'd like to discuss further. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Gwen. That was really informative and really cool to see the amount of different types of imaging you get to do at your workplace. That was really cool. So we've got a few minutes for questions. So if you do have any questions for Gwen, feel free to put them in the chat now. So we'll be keeping an eye on that, and then yeah, if questions are coming, we'll answer them, and if not, we'll move on to the next speaker.
I'm happy to come back at the end as well if there's any that come through, John.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can ask you some, because obviously, you know, you were kind of mentioning that you know, you guys are photographers at the end of the day, and now you're doing all these new techniques, or certainly new for you. What were the kind of challenges you faced when you tried to introduce these techniques?
There's lots of challenges when you're trying to develop these new techniques. The first one is, a major one is, particularly with the multispectral imaging, the training from the imaging scientists to photographers, and that kind of being lost in translation. So, you know, we were very aware that we're not imaging scientists, and we had some very long calls with imaging scientists who were not trainers, and so that kind of different kind of language exchange was a challenge. Space is a challenge for us always, and we've got a very limited space in our studio, so we're trying to dedicate space to these advanced techniques now, but it's always going to be a huge challenge, and even more now with COVID. As listed at the end of the presentation, their data management and metadata are a huge challenge, because we create so many images for every single item that we produce, and even figuring out which ones we need to keep long term and which ones we don't, another huge challenge. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I didn't want to interrupt you.
And then I was going to say, and then just the kind of the relationships with the researchers who maybe come and go, and you know, we kind of send this data out to them, and we don't always get to find out what happened in the end, and we really enjoy when we get the results back. That's always a benefit to us. So I guess there's a challenge there to join up that communication as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think Tony Harris had a question. He says, thank you, Gwen. I may have missed a visual on the new gold lighting setup. Can you tell me more?
Yeah, I've got diagrams I've got a presentation that kind of goes through that entire project in a lot of detail. So I was just really aware of time for today. So I'm happy to share that with you, Tony, or anybody who wants to see it. And it sets out all the different lighting setups for the different examples that I gave there. So really happy to share that.
Yeah, I think Mark Box also kind of was kind of saying yes, please, in terms of sharing. If you're happy to give that to us and we can share it through our website, or if you'd rather just share it individually with people, I'll up to you.
Perhaps what I could do is a blog post for the Ahfap blog. Perhaps that'd be the best thing, and pop it on there.
Yeah, that sounds great. So let's do that. I think I think a lot of people would be interested in that. And there's one more question from Cliff Cheney. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. What software do you use for data management?
Hi Cliff, that's a very good question. We still use our old image management system, which is called Luna, and at the moment we're still logging every single image in there, every single multispectral image in there individually, but what we're looking to do is work that data management into a TEI file so that then we can release it through our MDC platform, Manchester Digital Collections platform, and those images can then be IIIF compliant and viewed in Mirador and various other viewers. So at the moment we use Luna, but yeah, working with the guys at Leuven as well as an international group looking at metadata for multispectral imaging. So when that takes off, there might be more sort of standards coming out that we can share with people in the longer term.
Okay, great. I think at this point, again, like I said, we're recording this, and as you have seen, Gwen is sharing her email address. So if you've got any more questions, wait for us to upload the video, and then if you haven't noted down her email address, it'll be in the video, and so you can get in touch with her that way as well. Thank you very much, Gwen. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Right, okay, so in that case, we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Mary Freeman, who's currently the Group Photography Manager at the Science Museum Group and based in London, but as you know, the Science Museum Group operates UK-wide. So Mary, if you wouldn't mind starting to share your PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, hold on. Hello. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Hold on, Kira.
Yeah, perfect. I can see that.
Am I doing it? Okay. Fabulous. Oh, sorry, hold on. I'm just going to move some panels around. There we go. Okay, so hello, everyone. A short bit about me for those I'm yet to meet. I'm Mary Freeman. I've been photography manager at Science Museum Group for exactly 2 years. I replaced Kira when she began her PhD in 2018. So I'm talking mostly about the commissioning process today, but it's hard not to touch on some other management themes like my big vision for Science Museum and equipment, techniques, various other bits and pieces. So I'll just move on to the next slide. A little bit about Science Museum. From north to south, the photography team cover commissions on these 8 sites. We have Locomotion in Sheldon, the National Railway Museum in York, the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford, Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, Science Museum in South Kensington, London, and just for good measure, we also cover projects on off-site locations like the Type Archive in Stockwell, as well as working on location to shoot contemporary collecting projects like COVID-19 research labs and decommissioned power stations. We also have 2 collection centres at Blythe House in West London and the National Collection Centre in Swindon, where we are almost finished building a purpose-built collections management facility. Izzy and Kev shot this picture last week that shows the newly installed solar panels on what looks scarily like a giant IKEA warehouse. To keep you hooked, the inside is far more exciting. I've got some pictures of that later on. We've got 5 operational studios and expect to open the new studio down here in Swindon at some point in 2022, maybe, depending on build progress. Additionally, Science Museum are also running a large-scale digitisation project where we've got 8 junior photographers imaging objects as part of a collections moves workflow out of Blythe House, which is due to close at some point in 2024. In other words, we are an absolute juggernaut. Anyone that's worked at Science Museum knows that we're a hugely complex organisation that's extremely challenging to navigate, but nonetheless an awful lot of fun. It's my job to try and make the photographer's life much easier by implementing robust systems to manage their workload. Our department has a remit to deliver digital content across many platforms beyond collections of photography. So today I'm focusing specifically on how improving communication with our stakeholders to advocate for quality first across every job that comes our way. Before I get into the main body of my talk, I'd also just like to quickly add that on a personal note, I'm monumentally sad to be greeting you from London and not from Edinburgh this year. And not just because we'd had a really good party in the Old Town tonight, but because I spent 3 amazing years at National Museum Scotland, learning a thing or two about the importance of photographic craft and lighting design for historical objects from Neil, who runs the studios there. The studios at National Museum Scotland produce an exceptionally high calibre of museum photography, and I couldn't have asked for a better start to my career in our sector. So I'm extremely pleased by the prospect of this conference taking place up the road in 2021, and look forward to seeing you all there in the UK's most beautiful country. Also, a really quick thank you to Kira and to Richard for having me present some ideas to the association today, and also for such a warm welcome to the capital. You've both been extremely supportive and I'm really grateful for that. Ahfap's given me access to an extensive network of colleagues and friends since moving down here, and I appreciate the presence and impact the association's had on my move south. Just on a quick note as well, I promise to work very hard as membership secretary going forward. That's a role that I'm extremely keen to get cracking on with, so I appreciate your confidence in me. Okay, so from blue skies to harsh realities, I think it's important to start this talk by referring to the context of the big picture, to acknowledge the point in history that we're at as being pivotal to what happens next in our sector. And this underpins some of my key messages here and why I think advocacy for our work is so important. So let's be clear, pressure for museums and arts organisations to generate commercial revenue is now directly resulting in job losses due to astronomical gaps in funding across cultural heritage sectors. So this is largely due to the lack of commercial activity on our sites, the direct impact of COVID-19 lockdowns for the past 9 months, but organisations are looking at every which possible way to save money just to stay afloat and keep the doors open. For all of us, this poses a threat to our livelihoods and a threat to the deregulation of our professional standards, where business decisions to make savings are being cross-examined at every single level. It's critically important that we as a body take note of this and work together over the next few years to do our best to protect not only our own jobs, but the jobs of young photographers who don't even know that they want to work in museums yet. The pandemic and the resultant economic depression has the potential to dilute the quality of digital footprint our national collections hold for future generations, or worse, potentially devalue the nature of photographic representation collected in archives from which the subsequent interpretations of history are formed. So with this in mind, what I'm presenting today is the start of a simple idea that I'm inviting you all to contribute to. This short talk I've called Commissioning Better Photography, and it's a very simple piece of work that aims to visualise the different categories of professional photography used by our stakeholders and clients to represent all aspects of museum activity. quantifying our resource accurately is the best way to create jobs and opportunities in this climate. So these categories are organised by technical approach and differentiate between styles of shooting based on photographic response to controlling our environment. We know that working in a studio is very different to working outdoors or in a theatre or in a gallery space with mixed lighting, but our clients don't see that. So what I mean by commissioning better photography is improving the vocabulary of visual language used to communicate internally in our institutions. The end goal being the advocacy for photographic professionalism is easier for us and the go-to for our clients. One of the biggest challenges we face as photographers, whether you're a freelancer, a staffer or a manager, is exacting the crux of any given brief. So often we're asked to just cover this event or do the best you can, but don't take too much time. And the most disappointing thing that can happen because of being poorly briefed is the client responding to work with comments like, oh, but I wanted it to look like X or Y. As a creative, this is extremely difficult to hear when you've been asked to just cover something as quickly as possible. So now we all know how long it takes to make a great photograph. It certainly takes me a while, but in a world where we're constantly asked to do things faster and cheaper, quantifying standards is an essential part of managing our resource. And only with evidence are we able to make that case successfully. Just to clarify, by evidence, I don't mean like finger in the air guesstimates based on the ideal scenario. I mean hard data derived from the actual recorded times for the real jobs we do day to day. So this is what I'm implementing, albeit quite slowly, but through improvements to our request system at Science Museum. You'll be pleased to know I'm moving on to slide 4. That's not my actual phone number. So I'm starting with a quick grab of Science Museum's photography request form. This relatively ugly web form was developed in collaboration with our ICT department, who helped me to create drop-down menus and simplify commissioning to a series of quantified options and tick boxes, reducing any requirement for clients to try and populate free text fields. We know that just results in badly written, confusing briefs. So this is the only part of our request system that I'm going to cover in the photography, cover today, the photography service option, which is essentially this list of categories describing the different types of photography my team currently offer. So here they are. I've got them broken down into different sections. So services that we currently offer, services that we hope to offer. These potentially in scope ones are services that basically I'm trying to procure the appropriate equipment to produce this kind of work to professional standard, and services that are out of scope and out of the vision for SMG's photography studios at the moment. The out of scope is something I'm really interested in hearing more about from other people. I know these are services offered by other departments in the sector. Ultimately, I'd like to create a comprehensive set of terms that can generate an inclusive glossary that others can use if they want to. So again, feedback for this is invited, so do get in touch with ideas and notes. This list is currently dubbed the Photography Services Catalogue and forms an accompanying guide to our request system. So it uses terminology that can facilitate clients to communicate in words that make sense visually. The idea being to clarify exactly what's been asked for and what the final output will look like. Hopefully this makes it easier for my team to control their shifts and have autonomy to be creative or not, depending on whether the brief is objective or requires editorial storytelling. So I'll show you some pictures. I'm just going to go through each of these categories and give you a bit of an idea of what each of these categories looks like. So object photography, we describe as museum standard bespoke photography of collections objects. So this is our bread and butter, our most requested work. It's our primary skill. So at Science Museum, technically, we light for materiality of the object. We choose not to flood objects with flat light. Instead, we make deliberate light and design choices to show texture, shape and form. This is written into the SMG brand guidelines for enhanced collections object photography and things that go on display. Here's another example. I've got got a few examples of each of these in some places. So move on. 360 rotational. So this produces a 360 rotation of objects by generating up to 360 individual images. So don't actually have one spinning here. I've got a link to our website where this spins, but I'll show you that at the end if people are interested. I think most people are aware of this. These are made using SpinMe hardware and software. But yeah, we can come back to that visual at the end if you'd like. 2D digital reprographics. Standard sizing here because I guess there's two different options with this for things that are less than A3 or things larger than that where we know we need to use tiling techniques, etc. So one-to-one reproductions of flat artworks, prints and archives up to A3 in size. In terms of the technical approach, again, we know that this is going on a standard copy stand setup with even lighting or a scan on the flatbed. Scanning transparent material, so digitization of glass and film negatives and transparencies, any format of anything transparent. Again, the client doesn't need to know how we're going to image this, but from our perspective, we know that this can mean photographing the object on a light box, or it can mean scanning plus an inversion or treatment in Photoshop or Silverfast. It's just useful for our planning to understand the different format of material and to be able to differentiate between something that's transparent and reflective. Gallery views are interior architecture. So gallery views are architectural vistas showing collections on display. So these are more commonly commissioned by our communications departments to be used in press, marketing, or on the website. Mostly of new displays, but also ahead of decants, especially for capital projects that might not have been photographed recently. It's also really important to have a historical record of our exhibitions. And these are used across so many different channels, but also regularly asked for from the archive as well. So from a technical perspective, we know that we want to be using things like tilt-shift lenses and bracketing to make sure we get all the detail. Here's another example. I threw this in because this is an image shot by Jenny and Izzy last Christmas of our new building down in Swindon. It actually has changed quite a lot since these were shot, but yeah, thought I'd throw that in to show off. Editorial portraiture. The people behind the objects lit to perfection are our most exciting spaces. So I guess the key thing with editorial portraits is that these are planned, recce, and carefully considered images. It takes an awful lot of thought to place someone in a scene, to tell a story. And here's another couple of examples of how these are used in print. But it's really important that we don't confuse them with events coverage. So this I describe as reactive as it happens press coverage of live events. And we all know that that means you're often working in extremely dark spaces. You have to crank the ISO right up high. The aesthetic quality is very, very different from editorial work. So separating these two things out is helping me to manage expectations of clients. It also helps to push them to give us more time if they want something that's going to be usable in print quality. Behind the scenes documentary. Somewhere between the last two categories, but I suppose the key thing with this, or the key thing that differentiates it, is how long we have to wait for an event or an activity to happen. So often it's during install. So programming for these shoots actually means taking out a full day or 2 days or a week of any photographer's time. So thinking about, the value of that and how we cost that into our project is really, really important. So again, getting clients to think about the difference between behind the scenes documentary and an editorial portrait that might take 1 hour is really important. So we list them as separate categories. E-commerce products. So good quality images of products on white backgrounds to be sold in the shop. These are quick cutouts to white. I guess in the photographic industry, they might be called pack shots. The reason that we do them within our team is because historically they've been farmed out to freelancers, and from our perspective, if we can keep that cash in-house, it allows us to centralise that budget, and actually we get a lot more bang for buck. So it allows us actually to use that cash flows to subsidise other collections-based projects and increase commercial revenue in other ways. So yeah, we do some of these. We also do e-commerce lifestyle shots for the same clients for our internal e-com teams. But yeah, these do something different. So here, Izzy is using her wonderful skills. She's made these look phenomenal. But yeah, there's we're selling a luxurious lifestyle here with Science Museum keyrings. Time lapse. I just realised earlier that you guys have probably all seen this time lapse that Kev showed last year for his medicine project, but a sequence of frames at set intervals to record changes that takes place slowly over time. Again, time lapse often used back of house or behind the scenes kind of stuff to show objects moving through spaces, etc. Retouching and digital restoration. Restoring the appearance of a digital copy of a physical photograph that's been affected by natural, man-made or environmental causes, including aging. So this is an interesting one, especially from a digital preservation perspective, because obviously we wouldn't want to have a retouched image as our final record of this wonderful Muybridge print. But for exhibitions, they quite often request that for graphic panels or interpretation that we turn it into something that you can see. So obviously, we say 2 versions of this and note in the metadata all the changes that have been made, but this is something that we're asked to do on quite a frequent basis. So again, it's important that we quantify that as a separate kind of job and a separate skill set. Contemporary collecting, my favourite, photographs that document the social aspect of the object or site. This provides context that can't be gathered through collection of the object alone. So know that the guys over at Welcome, Richard and Ben and Tom, are doing really great work in this area. These images focus on storytelling, documentary photography, and understanding the provenance of objects through visuals before they end up in museum spaces. So here we've got a Science Museum collected this control panel of a power station, a decommissioned coal power station in a place called Cotton last year. So Kev went up there and photographed it in situ before it's moving down to our collection centre. There's a couple more where he's gone and photographed the outside of the power station, and he's even got inside the boilers here. I think Kev at some point might share some more of these with Ahfap, hopefully next year. Exterior architecture. So we describe this as technically accurate and striking photographs of buildings or structures. Jenny did this again last Christmas. This is our new building down in Swindon. She did actually fall over getting this shot, and yeah, she did fall in this big puddle. And she also got a serious telling off from the health and safety guy for running around in the dark. But to my mind, it was worth it for this beautiful sunrise, and Jenny wasn't hurt in the end, so we're all good. Case security documentation, so photographs of objects and cases with the date and timestamps and the metadata. These are predominantly for our colleagues in audit and registration who need these images for insurance and evidence purposes. It's just part of good museum practice generally that we create these before a new display opens. Out of scope, this is my most boring slide. I thought I should break it up. Now the next set of services that I'm going to talk about, we actually do work on at the moment, but I've got them described as out of scope because we don't have the right equipment. The team do a combination of MacGyvering and extensive post-production to deliver images of extra large objects and extra large archive material. So excluding them from our standard offers allowed me to make a business case for bespoke equipment solutions that make these processes more accurate and faster. So Whilst we do execute some of the work by solutionising, without the right tools, I estimate we take up to about 75% longer, which is a totally ineffective use of our resource. 2D digital reprographics outside, so things bigger than AU3. Again, I touched on this earlier, but we know that in order to get one-to-one reproduction, we have to use tiling techniques. Ideally, for Science Museum Group, we want to invest in a large format scanner. The majority of our outsized collections are literally millions of archival and engineering drawings. We have a very small collection of paintings or flat artworks. So yeah, we will look at doing tiling techniques with medium format cameras at NCC, but our painting collections are relatively small in volume. Large object photography, this slide's a bit funny with the scale, but from spacecrafts to submarines, locomotives and cars, SMG's largest and most breathtaking objects shown in their best light. So the current solution that we have for photographing these objects is moving the light around each facet of the object and lighting it in sections and then compositing the shots together. This works, but it takes, I think, on average, about 20 hours per view. It's not necessarily a great use of resource, even though we know the product is very, very strong. Here's a quick visual just to show the difference between a documentation shot of a large object and what the photographers can do. So we know that we can do it, it's just very, very slow. Part of the big vision for NCC, and we're not sure if we can make this happen yet or not, but is to introduce what we're dubbing the mega cloud. This is a giant LED panel that would fit in our large objects conservation and photography space that's been built down at NCC. So everyone cross their fingers that we get some money to actually put this in next year. But this is a concept devised for us by David Morphy at Cyrillite, and with a lot of help from Tash at Wex. So yeah, watch this space, out of scope at the moment, but this is what we're hoping to do. Aerial photography, again, not something we currently offer, but drones are relatively inexpensive and offer a wonderful alternative perspective to our sites. Certainly something I want to offer at NCC and hopefully at the Railway Museum up in York, thinking about scale and perspective. So these images actually were commissioned by our comms team a few years ago. They're on file, but I don't have a record of a photographer, so apologies for the lack of an image credit. If they're yours, let me know. Light Revolution, again, not something that we offer, but something that we're hoping to include in our new studios. These images are taken from a demonstration we did with Patrick last year. There's a second slide here showing a lovely fossil as well. Finally, photogrammetry, again, something that we can potentially offer, but we don't have quite the right software, or we know that there's better solutions. So it's sitting on our out of scope list at the moment. But yeah, hopefully we'll get some equipment to offer 3D models as well.
Mary, sorry to interrupt. Just if you wouldn't mind speeding up because we're coming to the end of this session. Thanks.
I'm almost done, Kira. All the UV stuff, multispectral imaging is currently out of scope for Science Museum. So I'll not talk too much about that. So yeah, just to recap again on what we've got in each of those areas in our service catalogue. Benchmarking, I really wanted to quickly just mention this. I'm collating a database of job roles and salaries. If anyone's interested in contributing to that, let me know. Also, if anyone needs help with business cases about roles or salaries, get in touch as well. Here's my contact information. And I've got some thanks. Just quickly want to mention my team whose images I've used in this presentation today. So massive thanks to them for listening to me rant about these things on a daily basis. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mary. That was really interesting to see what's been happening in the Science Museum in the last couple of years. I think we've got time for one question, and then if you've got any question for Mary that we can't answer now, obviously, again, please feel free to email her. So if anyone's got a really pressing question for Mary, feel free to put them in the chat. Right, I'm not sure there is actually going to be a question. Let's just wait another minute. If not, I've got one, but obviously I want to make sure the attendees actually get to ask their question. All right, Tony's asking you to keep us up to date on the cloud. Hopefully that'll come through.
Tony, we've got irons at the fire, but yeah, it's obviously a really difficult climate at the moment, so there's no guarantees, is there?
Yeah. Then I think there's interest in your lighting techniques. So if your team members could do another Ahfap blog, I think on lighting techniques, that would be very much appreciated by people. Gwen is asking if you have a catalogue of services that you can share from the slides.
Yes, so I do. I have multiple documents that I can share. I guess we can put that out through the mailing list or something like that. That's fine. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Cool. In that case, thank you very much, Mary. That was a really interesting presentation. And we shall move on to our final speakers. We've got Jessie Morco. I'm really sorry about the surname. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it. And we've got Colin White, both from Art UK. They work as photography managers, but also have their own private practice as photographers and freelancers. So yeah, if you want to go ahead with your presentation, then
sure. Hi. Thanks,
you.
Kira. I'll just put that up straight away.
Yeah, perfect. We can see that. Thank you.
Can everyone see that? Great. So Colin and I are going to be talking about Art UK's sculpture project, and we'll just dive right in. So Art UK is a cultural education charity in the UK, previously known as the Public Catalogue Foundation. Since 2003, it has digitized over 250,000 paintings and works on paper by over 40,000 artists with its partner collections. So you may have heard of Art UK through its painting projects. That was a couple of years ago. Well, actually over 10 years ago. And now Art UK moved on to the sculpture project, which was a 3-year project that began in May 2017. So today on Art UK's website, there are over 3,000 collections that are represented, and that showcases on the same platform collections as varied as the V&A and Inverness Airport, who have one sculpture to give you a sort of sense of scale of what exists. And by doing that, Art UK erases, in a sense, the institutional hierarchy that exists between collections, and that I'm sure we're all very well aware of. And that allows for a form of transversal research and discovery. The other point is that Art UK aims at making art more democratic and challenges the idea that cultural appreciation requires expertise and good taste. And in the charity's own words, it aims at making art available for everyone for enjoyment, learning, and research. So I think in that, the concept of pleasure is really important, and I sort of wanted to have a couple of words on that. That's reflected in the actual wording that exists in Art UK's activities. For instance, if you want to look up an artwork on the website, you go to discover, and that's very different, I think, from search or research. Also, in terms of content, Art UK proposes stories and podcasts. And within that, alongside topics of gender, race, and the more sort of conventional history of art topics, you have the fun topics and the silly topics. And just a couple of examples of that are a few titles I wanted to read out. Pineapple Mania, Art History's Fixation on the Exotic Fruit, or Masks and Stripes, Top 10 Zebras on Art UK, and Bum Notes, the cheeky side of Renaissance in art, which was unsurprisingly a top story for several consecutive weeks. So within that as well, there's a very important axis on learning and engagement, and we can look into that when we look at the sculpture project in detail. So the sculpture project aimed at a 3-year project to document the publicly owned sculpture of the UK, and with an aim to photograph 20% of collection sculpture with professional photographers, train volunteers to photograph sculpture in public areas, a sculpture learning and engagement program, and 25 training courses for museum staff. So there are actually sort of 2 dimensions to the sculpture project. There's this digitization side and the training side. So within the digitization side, as we've just seen, there was the goal of photographing 20% of publicly owned sculptures inside collections, and that was done by professional freelance photographers. And working with those freelance photographers, there was a team of 25 coordinators that were helping to catalog and to research the artworks that we were photographing. Because you have to bear in mind that a lot of the smaller collections that Art UK were working with, well, they don't have a DAM system, and some of them don't even have an Excel spreadsheet with information on the sculpture. So you really want to think about also all that research and cataloging and collection of information that was getting done alongside the photography. There was also a program of photography of outdoors public sculpture, which was realized by volunteer photographers. And then looking at the training side of the project, there were, we aimed at doing 25 trainings for museum staff. On one side, how to photograph your own collections with a minimum of equipment. Also what you can expect from a freelance photographer if you're going down the route of hiring a freelance photographer. Also trainings for museum staff on how to care for your sculpture collections organized by a professional conservator. We trained volunteers to photograph sculptures outdoors and also record data on those same sculptures. And then there was an incredible work from the learning and engagement team who ran different events such as masterpieces in schools, where they loaned artworks from museums and collections and brought them into primary schools and had activities around those artworks, discussing them with young people and doing some own creative work as well. And that reached out to almost 10,000 children across the UK. And then there were pop-up events with Sculpture Around You events, where in the same sort of way, artworks were taken out of the white box of museums and brought into spaces where they're not usually shown, like hospitals, parks, sports centers, etc. And that reached out to 11,000 participants. So ahead of the photography project, there was a photography pilot in which I didn't take part. This is Colin that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. So Colin and our digitization managers who were coordinating the coordinators across the UK went to a couple of collections and evaluated ahead of time what were the kind of specifications that we could expect in terms of photography and what results we could expect in terms of cataloging. So evaluating what kind of equipment would be necessary, how many sculptures could be done in a day, and thinking about specifications. And then again, you have to remember that we were confronted to such a variety of situations. I mean, sculptures on display, sculptures in storage, sculptures in glass cases, sculptures over stairs. Sometimes the sculptures needed to be cleaned. sometimes the sculptures needed to be found. So yeah, just such an incredible diversity of situations, which also made the project, I think, really appreciable. So in terms of planning, the UK was divided into 25 regions. Each region was designated a coordinator. Okay, so those were managed by digitization managers, and the coordinators were in charge of contacting collections, sort of making a first audit of what collections owned in terms of sculpture, and then liaising with photographers to plan photography shoots and recording data on the sculptures when they were in situ. We worked with 40 freelance photographers from Devon to Orkney, and over 500 volunteers took part on the project, with around 150 active at any one point. One of the tools we used to work with, to sort of liaise between freelance photographers and the coordinators, is ZMaps, which allows you to create interactive maps and share them. So with that, we were able to locate the 40 photographers on a map across the UK, and then the coordinators could research the location of a collection geographically and sort of have a look at which were the closest photographers to that location. And then they would get in touch with us, and depending on the proximity of the photographer to the collection and also the quality of the work that the photographer had submitted previously, then we would encourage the coordinators to use such and such a photographer. Photographic guidelines. I'm going to pass on to Colin for this one. Colin?
Yeah, I'm just coming. Hello.
Okay.
Okay. Righty-ho. Okay, so yes, in the summer of photographic light, yeah, in the summer of 2015, we did the pilot, and yeah, one of the first things we did was we put together a photographic guideline where we put together how photography could be done and at what kind of rate we could work at. I mean, basically, we were given a certain amount to do in a certain time period to a certain budget, and basically these guidelines take that into account and try to put together a package that could fulfill what Art UK required. Okay, next slide. Sorry, I will apologise. Jessie has to work the slide for me. Okay, so the first thing we did was we stipulated that the cameras we wanted had to be capable of a minimum of 30 megapixels. Now, bear in mind that this is late 2015. Canon didn't bring out their 5D Mark IV until summer of 2016. So we were kind of thinking ahead, looking at what might be possible for a general camera by the time the project got going. They need a range of lenses. As Jessie said, some of the situations we found ourselves in were very, very small. Things could be very, very high. So therefore you needed telephoto wide angle lenses. You never quite knew what you were going to find when you arrived at a location. Tripod, portable flash equipment with a softbox. We generally are looking to document the sculpture rather than make flashy kind of posters. So therefore we were looking at using a more diffuse light. So softbox were quite important. You need a background support, and we decided as our general background, we would use storm grey as our background. So all our photographers had to have rolls of storm grey paper. The reason for storm grey, it was the first one I bought. It worked quite well on the pilot, and we decided to keep it. For general colour, kind of consistency, we plumped for using a QP grey card, which would be put in at least one shot with every sculpture. This will now enabled us to make sure we could work with the white balance correctly. And also a lovely thing about the grey card is, QP grey card, is they're quite cheap and they have a scale on them. And then the other thing we decided the photographer should have is collapsible tables, as in they could put them away, not they'd collapse when the sculpture's on them. And that's mainly because some of the places we go to are just run by volunteers. There are a huge amount of situations where we could go and there would be no table. So the photographers had to have their own tables, take to the shoots. Okay. Next one. We decided on basic 6 views, straight on, kind of 3/4 views, sides and back. And each sculpture, if possible, was to be photographed on those 6 views. If we go to the next slide, we also allowed the photographers to do their own thing. We called this the fun shot, and I have to be brutally honest here, this wasn't my idea. After I wrote the original guidelines, I sat in an Ahfap conference, I think it was 2015, 16, something like that, and Kira actually sort of said that she was doing this at the Science Museum, and I thought, yeah, that's a great idea, because it's going to look really boring on a website if everything's of the same angles. So one of the things we allowed the photographers to do was do what they like. As long as the picture was good, we'd accept it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So image processing, as I said before, we had a storm grey background roll. We decided to use the background roll to actually set the white balance if it was used. The main reason for that is on lots of shoots, we can't control the lighting. Although we had flash, there was lots of places where there was lots of other lighting involved. And what we found was if we used a QP card, depending on the angles we were taking things at, the backgrounds could actually change color due to the ambient light that might be in the room and the angles you took it at. And when these were put on screen, you put your 6 pictures on screen, what you found was that your eye was taken away from the object because the background changed color very subtly. However, we still use the QP card, and we could use that if we wanted to. What we decided to go for was consistency over a little bit of accuracy. At the end of the day, we were looking to represent the objects, not fully color manage as if it was a 2D object. And we made sure that there was nothing burnt out or blocked in on the highlights or the shadow areas. And we used the Adobe RGB 1998 color space mainly for that. Although we are an online repository, the images get given to the collections at the end of the day, and they may want to use them for print. So we decided to use the bigger color space because we can always come down. And of course, there was lots of stuff done which we didn't have on backgrounds, and so therefore we used the QP card in those occasions to actually set the white balance. Okay. File formats, we were quite relaxed about that. We allowed photographers to send in their proprietary raw file format or DNG, whichever they saw fit, and the raw files were then converted to JPEG. And all we asked for was that the color temperature, tonal and straightening adjustments were made to the raw files to produce the JPEG, and then any other minor adjustments done on the image file before being sent to us. As I say, the color space was Adobe RGB. Resolution, we asked to be set at 300 dpi. It doesn't really matter what it was set to, but we just decided to, for ease, we would make sure that it was all consistent with everyone. And the only sharpening we would allow would be any default sharpening that a program like Capture One or Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw would apply anyway. We didn't want any excessive sharpening put into the files. Okay. We came up with a file naming system. There's an example at the top, and this is given by every collection has an Art UK accession mnemonic, which would be at the start. We'll then use the collection's accession number. And then the last bit, in this case, is QP. This signifies this is the image with the reference chart in. And then all subsequent images of that object would have 001, 2, 3, etc. after it. I see we've got 3 twice, it should be 4, but there you go. And all the RAW and JPEG images should have identical file names, except for the suffix afterwards. So photography began in April 2018. This is the official start for day. This was in Southend with the Lord Lieutenant of Essex coming for the day with our photographer. As it happened, 2 days photography actually took place prior to this. And next one. And so where are we now? Well, my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully we can get through this. The photography will be completed at the end of this month. Both Jessie and myself will be leaving. So if anyone's got any jobs, bear us in mind. The total number of participating collections was 822. And of those, 787 we did photography for. For collections photography, which is where we sent freelance photographers, we did 941 days photography. We photographed, at the moment, this number is changing slightly, 15,197 sculptures, and there was 92,344 images of those sculptures. And that's about 35% of public sculpture in collections in the UK. Now, at the beginning, Jessie said that we aim to do 20%, and now we're saying 35%. We haven't really done anything special here. This increase in percentage is simply down to the fact that, as we know so far, there are fewer sculpture, there's less sculpture in the UK than was initially thought, or there are collections that wouldn't get on board with us. If that makes sense. So we've done the amount of photography we intended to do, is what I'm trying to say. Of volunteer photography, the volunteers have photographed so far 6,572 sculptures. They have produced 65,495 images, and that's approximately 60% of the total public sculpture in public areas. It is hoped that by the end of the project, which goes on for a few months, the volunteer photography will go on for a bit longer. They will actually complete 80% of sculpture in public areas. As of lockdown, we delivered 19 of 25 regional photography training courses, and the remaining 6 are now being converted to be delivered online over the next few months. And now we'd just like to leave you with just a short slideshow. Okay, and I just got a few thank yous to people that really helped us out. First of all, Magic at Cambridge University Library. Just like to say thank you for putting a location on for us so that we could talk to photographers, and also putting us in touch with photographers when we were unable to find photographers in the Cambridge area at that time. Thank you very much for that. We'd like to say thank you to the Royal Photographic Society for their support and access to their membership. who made up a vast majority of our volunteers. To Ahfap itself for access to the photographers through the job sections. We found some photographers through that. We also found a couple of photographers through the photographers directory, which I was able to contact through. And also just as a body of photographers, we were able to feel as though we had the contacts to get in touch and sort our problems out through it, which was really great. We need to thank the National Lottery Fund and all their grant giving bodies for funding the project. Also need to thank all the staff and volunteers at all the museums and galleries we went to, especially the ones that made us cups of tea when we got there. And finally, just like to thank all the volunteer and freelance photographers out there. Some of them might know who are listening at the moment, for helping us put together a great repository of work for everybody to enjoy. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting to see what you've been up to the last couple of years. We're slightly overrunning, but I'm sure we've got time for a few questions. If both you, Jesse and Colin, you've got a few more minutes for us.
Yep, a few minutes. Yeah.
Great. Okay. I think Andy Mabbott has left quite a long comment, which I'm not going to read out completely. So if you want to have a look at that later on, please feel free to do that. But basically, the one question that I am kind of finding in there is, has any consideration been given to asking volunteer photographers to open license their contribution and educating them about what that means, or to open licensing commissioned work?
Oh, sorry, I missed that, and I've lost the question. Hang on.
Sure, it's in the chat.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the
first thing to say is the volunteer photographers keep ownership of their images. They only lend us the image to be used on our website, so they're not our images. In actual fact, the volunteers are very, very up on licensing and everything. And in actual fact, the Royal Photographic Society drums it into them very, very fiercely. You try and get an image off a member of the Royal Photographic Society, they'll hit you with a proverbial baseball bat.
So was the use of volunteers presumably was to just get more work or get more images?
When you get Heritage Lottery funding, you have to have an element of volunteers in it, and so therefore we decided to use volunteers for doing the sculpture in public areas.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
But I would add that we do have a copyright team for Art UK, obviously, an internal copyright team. And in the same way as certain artists still own the copyright of the images of their artworks on the website, they would also contact the volunteer photographers if somebody wanted to make use of their images. So I'm sure that's still a possibility.
Okay, great. Is there any other questions? Tony is asking, why should we release our images to Wikimedia? If that is something you can actually comment on.
No, I can't.
No, neither can I.
Yeah, fair enough. Claire is asking, were there any really awkward sculptures to photograph? Actually, that was a question I also had. What, like, the really, really challenging object?
I would like to say the Science Museum. I did Rowton, is it? Rowton?
Broughton.
And I got told that they had something a bit big and they'd get it out for me. What they didn't tell me it was sort of like filled the hanger and it was like a long Brillo pad. And I had 20 minutes to do it. So
that's what Mary was referring to, as in we're capping it at 2 meters, the longest side, because we have an awful lot of very, very large objects at the Science Museum.
Yes, just to say, the Science Museum were a little bit kind of bending the truth slightly when I actually saw it. I think it took them over an hour to get out. Yeah, so yeah, there was some very awkward stuff. Jessie, yourself?
Yeah, I was just going to add the actual average of sculptures photographed per day was around 17. And that would depended on a lot of parameters. As you say, Colin, sometimes you know, the size of the sculptures and locating the sculptures and getting them out into a place they could be photographed. But it was also sort of finding a compromise between, you know, the photographer's expectations and how good he wanted the image to be and how much time we sort of had available for each collection. So there was that kind of fine balance that had to be found each time. We couldn't spend, you know, 20 hours to get a really great shot of a reflective sculpture. There was a sort of balance to be found.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. That's all very often the case in our job, isn't it? The kind of throughput you're being asked to produce, but also obviously wanting to get a certain quality yourself, and also really shot something I think we're all passionate about, that we're not just taking snaps, we're really doing a bit more than that. Okay, I think we're gonna stop this presentation here. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was really interesting to see. Just to see all the beautiful images you've taken. So at this point, I think I want to thank all the speakers today. Thank you very much, and also obviously all of you for joining, for asking questions, for being interested in what we as Ahfap and our members are up to. Just one very quick one. I've heard of several people not receiving the email invite, even though they had registered on Eventbrite. Please make sure to check your spam folders, make sure to check your firewalls. I know that some of the bigger institutions have fairly strict firewall policies, so it might be that there is a way for you to tackle it that way. Obviously, if you know of anyone who has had issues and has not received their link, they can always contact us on webteam@ahfap.org.uk. So if you know of anyone who's had issues, just send us an email and we'll make sure we'll get the link to you that way. And yeah, that leads me to say thank you very much again, and I'll see you all Wednesday next week at 12 o'clock. Thank you very much. Bye.